Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about a system that I think is one of the most important and basically one of the most dominant system in our body, and that is the nervous system. All right, nervous system. The nervous system is a little bit complicated, but I'll try my best to explain it to y'all in a simple and straightforward way. Okay. So the nervous system, like any other system in the body, has cells. But the difference between other system cells and the nervous system cells is that the nervous system cells have a special name and they look really different. So the special name for them is that they're called neurons. And how they look is, let me start off by drawing a picture. We have the cell body and the nucleus, so pretty similar to other cells, but from that cell body, we go out with a little extension, and then that extension has a bit more extensions. So the cell body is obviously called the cell body, or actually there's a special name for it. It's called soma, but I prefer cell body because it's pretty simple. This from here to here is called the axon. Axon is very important, and we'll get into more detail about it later. These ends are called terminal buttons. Terminal buttons. And I'm also forgetting something else. And that is there's little projections going into the cell body as well. And those projections are called dendrites. Dendrites. Alright, so what happens is when we get a stimulus, here, let me change colors. Let's go green. Alright, when we get in a stimulus, it goes in from the dendrites. The signal goes in from the dendrites to the cell body. Cell body processes it, decides what to do, and if it decides to continue the signal, it creates an electrical signal which travels from the cell body all the way down the axon to the terminal buttons. And the terminal buttons pick up this signal and they release chemicals called neurotransmitters. And these neurotransmitters are extremely important for communications, and they can go to another neuron and start up this process all over again by causing a signal at another neuron's dendrites, or they can go to some tissue like a muscle and cause the muscle to move. Some common neurotransmitters that you see people talk about in the field of neurology is acetylcholine. Hopefully I can spell it. Yep, that looks right. Acetylcholine, which affects movement. So you might see it land on some muscle. You see serotonin, which affects mood. We see dopamine, which affects reward. And dopamine is talked about a lot because addictive medications or addictive drugs take advantage of dopamine and cause it to keep on release every time you do it, every time you do the drug. And that's what makes us crave the drug even more, because we feel the feeling of pleasure and reward when we take that drug. And another one is glutamate, and that affects memory. All right. Now let me scroll down my page. All right, perfect. Now, let's look at how the nervous system is organized. There's two categories. There's the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Oops. peripheral nervous system, PNS. I labeled the central nervous system CNS and the peripheral nervous system PNS. Okay, so the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. Spinal cord. So the brain and the spinal cord help interpret the information that comes in. So they decide what the information is, they decide what to do next. Now the peripheral nervous system consists of two parts, the somatic part and the autonomic part. Okay. Autonomic part. So before we move on, it's important to understand the difference between voluntary and involuntary. Involuntary actions are something that you can't control, like you can't control your heart rate, you can't control how well you digest. Voluntary actions are things that you can control, like I can move my arm, I can grab a water bottle, I can eat, I can move my eyes, stuff like that. Now the somatic system does the voluntary stuff, and the autonomic nervous system does the involuntary stuff. First, let's look at the somatic. The somatic has two types of nerves to it. There's the sensory neurons, and then there's the motor neurons. So let's say you touched the table. The sensory neurons in your hand take the information or the fact that you touched the table to the central nervous system. The central nervous system processes it and then says, oh, let's take our hand off the table. And then you use motor neurons from the central nervous system out back to your hand, and then you remove your hand from the table. All right. So the autonomic nervous system. Oh, before we go on, I was forgetting one thing. There's special names for sensory and motor neurons in the somatic nervous system. And the sensory neurons are called afferent neurons, and then motor neurons are called efferent. A way to remember this is same. Sensory, afferent, motor, efferent. All right, hopefully that helps. Autonomic nervous system has two parts, parasympathetic and sympathetic. Parasympathetic is known as rest and digest. Sympathetic is known as fight or flight. Okay, and these are things that happen in the background. You have no control over them. Now, let's think of a situation. Let's say you go on a camping trip, right? You're walking on a trail and you see a bear. Obviously, you would be terrified. I would be terrified if I saw a bear. So, that moment you're terrified, your heart starts increasing its heart rate, and blood immediately starts flowing to your muscles, and your pupils dilate, and that happens automatically. And the fact that it's happening like that is due to the sympathetic nervous system, which increases in instances of fight or flight. Okay, and then you're like, hey, I gotta run away from this bear. So you start moving your muscles, you start moving your arms and legs to run away, and that's part of the somatic system. You're voluntarily doing that. And during that whole thing, your brain and spinal cord is interpreting all this information and deciding everything, what you have to do, deciding that you have to increase your heart rate, deciding that you have to dilate your pupils, and at the same time helping you decide that you should run away. Now, the parasympathetic is in situations where it's not necessarily a feeling of anxiety, where you're not feeling anxious or scared. It's just general situations. So parasympathetic, you could be sitting on the couch watching TV and your parasympathetic would be on because you're just relaxing. You're not necessarily doing anything unless you're watching like a scary movie or something. So that is basically the parasympathetic and sympathetic. I want you to understand that the autonomic and the somatic can be on together at once. Just like in that bear example, you were using that somatic nervous system to run away while you were inherently using the sympathetic without your control. All right, hopefully that helps and that gave you a better sense of the nervous system. All right, thank you for watching.